Tomorrow morning, go out and water your garden exactly the way you always do. Take your time. Do it right. Then walk away for 20 minutes. Come back, kneel down, and push your finger straight into the soil. Not 1 inch, 3 inches, all the way to the second knuckle. If it comes up dry, I need you to understand something, and it is going to sting. You did not water your garden. You watered the air above it. I have dug up dead plants in the middle of July, plants that were watered every single day by people who thought they were doing everything right and found the root ball still sitting there in the exact shape of the plastic pot it came home in. Bone dry, hard as a brick, surrounded by wet soil. That plant did not die of drought. It died of thirst in the middle of a flood. And here is the part that should make you angry. Everything you need to fix it is already sitting in your trash can, your shed, or that stack of cracked pots behind the garage. Not $1, not one trip to the garden center. By the time this is over, you will know why a cracked clay pot outwaters a drip system, and there is a peer-reviewed paper that says so. You will know about a creature quietly drying out gardens in 38 states right now, and how it gets in, riding inside the free mulch everyone keeps telling you to go and get. And you will know why the most popular garden design in America, the one you probably built with your own 2 hands, is the reason your soil turns to dust by noon. Nothing here is a theory somebody had in a comment section. Every claim comes with a name, a university, and a page number. Here is the thing nobody tells you about dry soil. Dry soil fights water. The University of California master gardeners in Santa Clara County describe it plainly. Most potting soils turn hydrophobic when they dry out completely. Water repellent and peat moss, the very ingredient that is in the bag because it holds moisture so beautifully, becomes almost impossible to re-wet once it goes bone dry. So you pour water on top, and water does what water always does. It finds the path of least resistance. It slides down the gap between the shrunken root ball and the wall of the pot, straight out the drainage hole, and puddles on your patio. You see water running out the bottom. Your brain says, "Good, it's soaked through." It did not. The center of that root ball is as dry as the day you carried it home. And the same thing happens in open ground, crusted clay. A path baked hard for 3 weeks. The water hits it, runs sideways, and you stand there holding a hose, feeling productive, while not one drop reaches a root. So before you carry one more bucket, fix the leak. Here is how, and it costs nothing. For a pot, stop watering from the top, set the whole pot inside a bucket with a few inches of water in it and walk away for 20 minutes. You will see bubbles rise. That is air being pushed out of the dry pockets by water finally getting in. When the bubbles stop, it is hydrated. That is bottom watering, and it will bring back a plant you had already written off. For a bed, forget the one long soak. Sprinkle lightly. Wait. Sprinkle again. Wait. 3 or 4 passes. You are coaxing the soil, not forcing it. And the moment it is properly wet, cover it, because soil that never dries out completely never turns hydrophobic in the first place. Everything else in this video is built on one sentence. Water that does not arrive is not water. It is exercise. Now, the plastic bottle. You have seen it 100 times. Cut the bottom off a soda bottle, jam a cotton swab in the cap, stick it in the ground beside your tomato. Millions of views every summer. And it does, technically, work. But think about what actually governs that bottle. Plastic is not porous. Water does not move through a plastic wall. It comes out of one hole, and it comes out because of gravity. And gravity does not know or care whether your soil is soaking wet or cracking apart. On a cool, cloudy day, it floods the root zone. On a blistering afternoon when your tomato is gasping, it delivers the same little trickle, and then it is empty by noon. The bottle waters on a clock. Now let me tell you about a piece of technology that waters when the plant asks. Dr. David Bainbridge published a review in the journal Agricultural Water Management, Volume 48, in the year 2001. The subject was buried clay pot irrigation, and the first line of its history is the one that stops you cold. The method was written down in a Chinese agricultural extension bulletin more than 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years. Somebody set down the instructions in a farming manual before Rome had an emperor. Here is what it is. Take an unglazed clay pot, terracotta, low-fired, never sealed. Plug the drainage hole, bury it in your bed right up to its neck, fill it with water, and put a lid on it. And then that pot does something no piece of plastic on earth can do. The wall of an unglazed clay pot is riddled with microscopic pores. When the soil around it is dry, the soil pulls. Dry soil has enormous suction. It draws water right through that clay wall, molecule by molecule, into the root zone. And when the soil gets wet, the pull weakens, and the water simply stops moving. No timer, no valve, no smartphone. It releases water at a rate set by how thirsty the soil actually is, hour by hour, all day long. Bainbridge's word for this is auto-regulation, and the numbers behind it are not small. He reports that buried clay pot irrigation is more efficient than drip irrigation, and as much as 10 times more efficient than conventional surface watering. And then there is the melon trial from India in his review. Melons grown on buried clay pots produced 25 tons per hectare using 2 centimeters of water. Melons under flood irrigation produced 33 tons using 26 centimeters. Run that through your head slowly. Roughly 3/4 of the harvest, on less than 1/10 of the water. Now the free version, because you are not buying a thing today. If you have gardened more than about 4 years, there is a stack of cracked, sun-faded terracotta pots behind your garage that you have been meaning to throw out for a decade. Every one of them is an irrigation device. Plug the hole with a wine cork or a blob of silicone. Bury the pot so only the rim shows. Fill it. Cover the top with an old dinner plate so mosquitoes stay out and the surface does not evaporate. Then plant around it. Not on top of it. Around it. The roots will find that pot on their own, and at the end of the season you will lift it out and see a dense white net of roots wrapped around the clay like a hand around a glass of iced tea. That is the plant telling you it found the water. One test before you trust it. Fill the pot. Wait an hour. If the outside goes dark and damp, it is porous, and it is working. If it stays bone dry, it has been sealed, and it will sit there doing nothing all summer. Bainbridge recommends exactly this check. And now the honest part. The part the people selling you ancient wisdom never say out loud. A buried clay pot waters a zone. It does not water a bed. The wet front spreads out roughly as far as the pot is wide. Sink one pot in a 10-foot row and you will be disappointed, and you will blame the method when the problem was your spacing. Plant close to it. Second, water only. Never liquid fertilizer. The mineral salts clog those pores and slowly turn your clay pot into a plastic bottle. Third, if your ground freezes hard, lift them out in the fall, because water expands when it freezes and it will split that pot right down the side. Before the next one, and the next one is what people are going to argue about in the comments. I want to hand you something. Everything here, plus the parts there is no room to say out loud, is in a free blueprint. The clay pot spacing chart by soil type. The mulch depth table. The full jumping worm checklist. The safe water list, with the things you should never put on food. The complete self-watering bucket build, step by step. And the exact journal, volume, and page for every study named here. So you can go read them yourself instead of taking anybody's word for it, including mine. There is a code on the screen right now. Point your phone camera at it. No email, no sign up. It just downloads. Print it, pin it inside the shed door, and stop trying to hold any of this in your head. Now, the mulch, and the thing that is hiding in it. Here is the single highest return thing you can do to a garden that keeps drying out, and it costs nothing but a phone call. Cover the soil. Bare soil in July is a wick. The sun hits it, the wind strips it, and the water you hauled out there leaves as vapor before your plants ever get a look at it. A senior project out of Cal Poly measured this directly. A mulch layer of at least 2 inches cut surface evaporation to about 40% of what bare soil lost over the first 3 days. And here is the detail that matters far more than the number. Wheat straw, grass clippings, and shredded leaves all performed about the same. Read that again. The free stuff worked as well as the stuff in the bag. Dr. Linda Chalker-Scott at Washington State University has spent a career on this. In her review of the mulch research, she reports that organic mulch in hot conditions can hold soil more than 10 degrees Celsius cooler than bare ground. That is roughly 18 degrees Fahrenheit. 18 degrees. That is the difference between roots that are working for you and roots that have shut the doors and gone home. Now the myth, because I already know what somebody is about to type. Wood chips steal nitrogen from your soil. No, they do not. Dr. Chalker Scott's Washington State Extension fact sheet on arborist wood chips says it about as plainly as an extension publication is allowed to say anything. Wood chips do not draw nitrogen out of your soil unless you till them in. Used on the surface, as a mulch, they have no effect on the nitrogen underneath. Over time, they increase it. The tie-up happens in the top half-inch where wood meets dirt. Your roots are not up there. Your roots are 6 inches down, and they are perfectly fine. So where do you get wood chips for nothing? Call a tree crew, not the garden center. A tree crew. When a crew chips a tree, they have to haul that load somewhere and usually pay a fee to dump it. Tell them they can back into your driveway and empty the truck for free, and you are not begging a favor. You are saving them money and an hour of their afternoon. 2 traps, and almost nobody mentions either one. Trap 1 is grass clippings. Fresh clippings, piled on thick, do not mulch your garden. They mat. They fuse into a slick green lid, and that lid sheds water. It will actually keep rain out of your soil. Let them dry to hay first and lay them thin. Less than an inch at a time. Thin and often beats thick in once. Trap 2 is not a technique problem. Trap 2 is alive. There is a worm loose in America that is drying out gardens, and it is spreading inside exactly the free mulch and free compost I just told you to go and get. They are called jumping worms. Aminthas, if you want the genus. They have now been recorded in 38 states, and last October the Colorado Department of Agriculture confirmed one in a Denver neighborhood. Now you might be thinking, worms are good. Worms are the whole point. Not these. Sam Chan, an extension specialist with Oregon Sea Grant at Oregon State University, put it about as clearly as it can be put. A normal earthworm burrows deep, and its castings help soil hold water. A jumping worm stays in the top 2 inches, and what it leaves behind does not absorb moisture well. You lose porosity. You lose structure. The soil gets drier. And they eat leaf litter, the very mulch layer keeping your soil cool and damp, 2 to 3 times faster than an ordinary earthworm. They strip the blanket off the bed, and then they turn what is left into something that will not hold a drink. 3 ways to know if you have them. The soil surface looks like somebody emptied a coffee filter across it. Loose, grainy, uniform little pellets. That texture is the signature. When you disturb them, they do not crawl. They thrash. They whip sideways like a snake, and they will sometimes drop their own tail and leave it wriggling behind. And this is the one that holds up in the hand. Look at the band around the body, the clitellum. On a normal earthworm, it is a raised pinkish saddle that does not quite close all the way round. On a jumping worm, it is smooth, milky white to gray, and it wraps completely around the body, like a wedding ring. If you find them, do not put them in your compost. Do not use them for bait. Bag them and bin them. And how do you keep them out? Tip that free load out on the driveway and look at it before you spread it on your beds. The cocoons die above about 104 degrees Fahrenheit, which is why solarizing a suspect pile under clear plastic in full sun is the one control that reliably works. There is no pesticide registered for this in the United States. Not one. That is not a reason to stop taking free wood chips. It is a reason to look at them first. Everybody else is going to keep dumping loads onto their beds with their eyes shut. You are going to spend 90 seconds looking. That is the whole difference, and it will show up in your soil for the next 20 years. Containers next, because containers are where gardens die fastest in a heat wave. A pot has no groundwater under it. Whatever water is in that pot is all the water there is. On a 100-degree day, a 5-gallon pot in full sun can go from wet to bone dry between breakfast and supper, and you can lose a tomato you have babied since March in the time it takes to drive to the store and back. So stop watering from the top. Let the pot drink from the bottom. You want 2 food-grade buckets, and you do not buy them. Walk up to the bakery counter at your supermarket and ask what they do with their old frosting buckets. In most places, the answer is that they throw them away. And yes, you can have some. And I have to stop you here, because this is a safety point and not a preference. Never use an old paint bucket for anything that touches a food garden. Not for this. Not for compost. Not for hauling soil. You do not know what was in it. And if it is an old one, you do not know what was in that paint. If it held food, it is fine. If it held anything else, it goes in the trash. The build is 15 minutes and a drill, and it is drawn out step by step in the blueprint. So let me give you the physics instead, because the physics is what keeps you from killing the plant. Bucket 1, hole, no holes, is a water reservoir. Bucket 2 sits inside it, a few inches up, with a small perforated tub of packed soil hanging down from its base into the water below. That tub is a wick. A pipe runs from the surface down into the reservoir so you can fill it without touching the soil. And then one hole. One single overflow hole, drilled through the side, level with the top of the reservoir. That hole is the only thing standing between you and drowned roots. Without it, you will fill the water past the point where the soil can breathe, and you will kill that plant faster than the drought ever would have. From then on, you pour water down the pipe. Not onto the soil, down the pipe. And the soil does the rest. Water climbs up through that packed wick by capillary action, the same quiet force that pulls coffee up a paper towel, and it climbs only as fast as the soil above is drying out. Wet soil does not pull. Dry soil pulls hard. You have just built a plant that waters itself out of 2 buckets somebody was about to throw in a dumpster. 3 honest limits, because I would rather you succeed than be impressed. Cap the fill pipe between waterings, because standing water is a mosquito nursery. Flush the whole thing from the top 2 or 3 times a summer because salts build up in a closed reservoir. And do not build this for anything that hates wet feet. Rosemary, lavender, thyme, most Mediterranean herbs want to dry out between drinks, and this will make them miserable. Build it for the thirsty ones. Tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, squash, greens. And now I want to talk about the most popular thing in American gardening and say something about it that is going to sit very badly with a lot of people. Your raised bed is drying your garden out. I did not invent that, and I am not being contrary for sport. Iowa State University Extension lists it flatly, in their own raised bed guidance, as a disadvantage. Raised beds dry out faster than level garden sites, and therefore they have to be watered more frequently in dry weather. Think about why. A raised bed is not a garden. A raised bed is a very large container that you have convinced yourself is a garden. It is exposed on all 4 sides. The sun bakes those walls. The wind strips those walls. There is no surrounding earth to insulate it. And the light, fluffy mix, you filled it with drains beautifully, which is only another way of saying it lets go of water beautifully. Every feature you built it for is the same feature drying it out, now. All across America, people are hammering together boxes to lift the soil up. In western New Mexico, the Zuni have spent something on the order of 1,000 years doing the exact opposite. They are called waffle gardens, and they look like what they sound like. A grid of sunken squares, each about a foot across, each ringed by a wall of packed earth built up around it. Sunken beds, inside raised walls. Jim Anote is a Zuni farmer who has been planting a waffle garden for 64 years. He learned to build them from his grandmother, and his description is the cleanest anybody has given. They are the inverse of a raised bed, and in an arid place, they are extremely efficient at conserving water. There are photographs of waffle gardens at Zuni Pueblo going back to 1873. This is not a trend. This is not somebody's hack. This is a 1,000-year field trial. And look at what that shape does. Rain does not run off. It falls into the square and stays in the square, and it sinks straight down to the roots instead of sheeting across your yard and out the driveway. Irrigation water does not spread sideways and vanish. It is contained. Every drop you pour goes down instead of out. And the walls, which is the part nobody mentions, the walls are a windbreak. At ground level. Exactly where the wind does its damage. You do not have to build a full waffle garden this weekend. You need 5 minutes and a hand trowel. Around every plant that matters to you, build a low, circular berm of soil. A ring, 3 or 4 inches high, out at the edge of where you think the roots reach. You have just made a basin, a dish, a moat. Now water into that dish and watch. It does not run sideways. It does not sheet off the crust and disappear into the path. It pools, it sits, and it goes down, straight down, into the root zone where you wanted it in the first place. That is free. That is 5 minutes, and it may be the highest leverage thing in this whole video, and you can do it before the sun goes down today. Now the honest part. And this is where I would rather lose the applause than lose your trust. Sunken beds are not for everyone, and if you copy this in the wrong place, you will hurt your garden. Gary Nabhan, the ethnobotanist, has seen these gardens in Egypt and in the Canary Islands, and his warning is the right one. Do not lift a tradition out of the climate it was built for. Localize it. The size, the water source, the soil type. So here is the line. If you garden on heavy clay, in a wet climate, on flat ground with poor drainage, a sunken bed is a bathtub. You will drown your roots and rot your crowns, and the raised bed you built is the correct answer for you. Keep it. Just get some mulch on it and stop letting it sit there naked. But if you garden in sand, if you garden in the west, the southwest, the dry plains, if your problem every July is that water disappears the second it lands, then you have been working against your own soil by lifting it up into the wind. And the people who solved this were solving it 1,000 years before anybody sold you a cedar kit. Those berms bring us to the 3 thieves that take your water before it ever reaches a root. You have already met the first one. Thief number 1 is wind. Evaporation is not driven by heat alone. It is driven by heat and moving air together. A still 90-degree day costs you far less water than a breezy 80-degree one, and almost nobody in this hobby talks about it. The free fix is an old pallet or a discarded screen door stood up on the windward side of your beds. And porous beats solid, because a solid wall makes turbulence that curls over the top and slams back down into your garden. A pallet, with its gaps, slows the wind without kicking it. Thief number 2 is the clock. Water in the early morning, not the evening, because water sitting on foliage at dusk keeps those leaves wet all night. And wet leaves all night is precisely what early blight and septoria have been waiting for. But here is the nuance nobody bothers with. That rule is about wet leaves. If you are watering underground, into a clay pot, or down a fill pipe, or into a basin at the base of the plant, then no leaf gets wet at all, and evening is perfectly fine. Watch the mechanism, not the slogan. And thief number 3. This is the one I want you carrying with you tomorrow morning. There is advice all over the internet telling you to warm your water before you pour it, because cold water will shock your plant's roots. In an American July, that advice is not merely wrong. It is backwards, and it is dangerous. Water sitting still inside a garden hose in the sun does not stay cool. Las Vegas Fire and Rescue has put out the same warning summer after summer. A hose left in direct sunlight can heat the water inside it to 130 or 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Dr. Kevin Foster, who directs the Arizona Burn Center in Phoenix, told reporters that water sitting in a sun-baked hose can reach 190 degrees, about as hot as coffee straight out of the pot. A 9-month-old boy in Arizona received second-degree burns across roughly a third of his body when his mother turned on a garden hose to fill his wading pool. That is not a freak one-off. Fire departments reissue this warning every single summer. The Anderson County Fire Protection District put one out just this month. So here is your rule, and it costs 30 seconds. Before you water anything, before you point that hose at a seedling, at a child, or at a dog, let it run out onto the driveway for 30 to 60 seconds until it runs cool. Nobody warned you to warm your water. Somebody should have warned you to cool it. Last thing. And it is the one where I have to take something away from you before I hand it back better than it was. You have seen the buried bucket. Drill a bucket full of holes, sink it into the middle of your bed, throw your kitchen scraps in, and the liquid that seeps out feeds your plants. They call it compost tea. It is not compost tea. And that matters far more than it sounds. Norman Arancon has been researching vermicompost for more than 20 years. He took his doctorate at Ohio State, and he now teaches horticulture at the University of Hawaii at Hilo. He draws this line himself, and he draws it hard. The liquid that collects in the bottom of a worm bin is leachate. Tea is something else entirely. Tea is made by steeping finished, mature vermicompost in water, like a tea bag. Leachate is just water that has run through raw, rotting food. That distinction is not academic snobbery. It is a food safety line. Cornell's guidance for growers states it directly. Compost leachate must not be applied directly to plants. It falls under the same rules as raw manure. 90 days before harvest for crops whose edible part does not touch the soil. 120 days for the ones that do. That is the United States Department of Agriculture's organic standard. And it exists because leachate has not passed through a worm's gut, and it can still carry whatever the food scraps were carrying. so do not spray it on your lettuce. Please. Now the good news, because the buried bucket is a genuinely excellent idea. It has just been sold to you with the wrong story attached. What that tower actually does is feed worms. Real worms find it, work through the scraps, and leave castings behind. And the castings are the thing you wanted all along. Aaron Kahn's own research found that vermicompost improves the porosity, the aeration, and the water-holding capacity of soil. It does not only feed your plants, it helps your soil hold a drink, which is the entire point of this video. And the worms tunnel and every channel they cut is a highway for water to get down where you want it instead of running off the top where you do not. So build it. But build it right. 4 things they did not tell you. Food-grade bucket. Never a paint bucket. No fresh manure. Not chicken. Not cow. Not horse. The University of Connecticut is blunt about it. Backyard compost piles usually do not heat up to the 130 to 150 degrees needed to kill pathogens. A cold tower in a shady corner is never getting close. E. Coli and Salmonella do not care how organic your intentions were. No weeds that have gone to seed. A cold tower will not kill a seed. You will be hand-sowing your own weed patch right into the middle of your best bed and shade the tower. Composting worms are not built for heat. A black bucket sunk into an open bed in full July sun is not a worm hotel. It is an oven. Then there is the water you are already pouring down the drain. The water you boiled pasta or vegetables in, as long as you did not salt it, is free water with a little starch and a few minerals in it. Let it cool completely, then take it outside. Your dehumidifier and your window air conditioner produce condensate, gallons of it in a humid week. And I am going to be straight with you rather than tell you what you would like to hear. Use it on your ornamentals, your shrubs, your flower borders. I would not put it on food crops. It has run across metal coils and sat in a pan, and there are legitimate open questions about metals and biofilm. Flowers, yes. Salad, no. And a food-grade drum becomes a rain barrel. Screen the top, because mosquitoes. Set the spigot high enough that a watering can fits underneath it, because you are not 25 and neither am I. That is the whole system. And you did not buy a single thing. Now I want to hear from you, and I want to start an argument. Here is what I actually believe, and I know a good number of you will disagree. Watering your garden every single day is the #1 reason your garden dries out. Every shallow sprinkle teaches your roots to stay up in the top inch, where the sun lives. Water deep. Water less often, and the roots will chase that water down to where the ground stays cool all summer. But some of you have grown magnificent gardens on a daily watering can for 30 years, and I want to hear you make your case. And then the bigger one. Across America, people are building boxes to lift their soil up into the wind. In New Mexico, people have spent 1,000 years digging it down. One of those 2 groups is using more water than it needs to. Tell me which one you think it is. And tell me your state and your soil. Sand, loam, or clay. Nobody has ever bothered to draw that map, and there is no reason the 2 of us cannot start drawing it in the comments tonight. A garden does not dry out all at once. It dries out through 100 small leaks you cannot see. The water that ran down the inside wall of a pot. The water that blew off a bare bed. The water that never got past the crust. The gardeners who are still going strong at 80 are not the ones who carried the most buckets. They are the ones who quietly worked out where the leaks were and stopped them, one at a time. Go push your finger into the soil, 3 inches down. Find out what is really under there.